25 years I gave to that man and his company. I answered his calls at midnight, entertained his clients on weekends, and edited every contract he ever signed. Then he traded me in for his 25-year-old assistant and demanded I sign away my rights to his fortune. "Be reasonable, Jane," he said. "You've never even been to business school." The look on Henry's face when my lawyer revealed I legally owned 80% of his empire is something I'll treasure until my dying day. I still remember the exact moment I realized my marriage was over. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It wasn't when I found the text messages, or when I noticed the lipstick on his collar, cliches that I'd somehow managed to avoid in our 25 years together. No, it was during our anniversary dinner at La Maison, that exclusive French restaurant downtown where Henry had proposed to me all those years ago. He'd barely looked up from his phone all evening. When I asked about his upcoming business trip to Singapore, his eyes darted away, focusing on the ornate ceiling, the waiter, anywhere but me. "I'm thinking of taking Elizabeth," he said, cutting into his steak. Elizabeth Chen, his new executive assistant, 25 years old, fresh out of business school, with perfect skin and a laugh that carried across the office whenever Henry said something remotely amusing. "Elizabeth?" I kept my voice steady. "You've never taken an assistant on an overseas trip before." The Richardson account is complex. He shrugged, still not meeting my eyes. "She's brilliant with the financial modeling, very detail-oriented." I nodded slowly, taking a sip of my wine. "I see." And I did see, very clearly. 25 years of marriage crystallized into perfect clarity in that moment. The late nights at the office, the sudden interest in fitness, the new wardrobe, the way he'd stopped inviting me to company functions. How painfully obvious it all seemed now, sitting across from this man who'd once been my entire world. "Happy anniversary, by the way," he added, almost as an afterthought, sliding a small box across the table. Inside was a diamond tennis bracelet, tasteful, expensive, and utterly impersonal. The kind of gift you give when obligation, not love, is your motivation. "It's beautiful," I said, and it was. But as I clasped it around my wrist, I couldn't help but notice how Henry's eyes kept drifting to his watch. He had somewhere else to be. Someone else to see. I excused myself to the restroom, my legs feeling strangely numb as I walked across the restaurant. In the elegant marble bathroom, I stared at my reflection. I was 48 years old, not young anymore, but not old either. My face showed signs of aging, but I'd always thought they were signs of a life well lived. Laugh lines from years of joy, a slight furrow in my brow from concentrating on building Henry's business from the ground up. Yes, building his business. That's how I'd always thought of it. His dream, his company, his success story that I'd devoted my life to helping create. I splashed cold water on my face and took a deep breath. When I returned to the table, I found Henry already paying the bill, eager to conclude our anniversary celebration. I didn't confront him that night. I wanted absolute certainty before I made any accusations. But I also made a decision, standing there in that restaurant bathroom. If my suspicions were correct, I wouldn't just walk away with my dignity intact. I would make sure I got everything I deserved from the life and business I'd helped build. The next morning, I called my old college roommate, Mary Winters. We'd fallen out of touch over the years, but I knew she'd become one of the city's most respected divorce attorneys. I asked her to meet me for coffee, just to catch up. Mary hadn't changed much in the 20 years since I'd last seen her. Still, the same sharp eyes, the same no-nonsense demeanor that had intimidated our professors back in college. "You're not here just to reminisce about the good old days, are you, Jane?" she asked after our initial pleasantries. I smiled weakly. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's seen that same look thousands of times. She leaned forward. Tell me what's going on. I laid it all out for her. My suspicions about Henry and Elizabeth, the years I'd spent helping build his company, my fears about walking away with nothing. Mary listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a small pad. When I finished, she tapped her pen against the table, thinking. Before we discuss anything else, she said carefully, I need to ask you something. Important. Who incorporated the business when you and Henry first started? I frowned, confused by the question. I did. Henry was brilliant with clients, but he hated paperwork. I filed all the incorporation documents myself. And whose name did you put on those documents? Both of ours, of course. We were equal partners. In everything back then. Mary's eyes lit up. Do you still have copies of those documents? Probably in the home office somewhere. Henry moved all the important business files to the company headquarters years ago, but I might have kept duplicates. Find them, Mary said firmly. And don't tell Henry you're looking. For the next week, I methodically searched through the filing cabinets in our home office when Henry was at work. Finally, in a dusty folder labeled MISC 1998, I found what I was looking for. The original incorporation documents for Westmore Consulting Group. I scanned the papers and emailed them to Mary immediately. 3 hours later, my phone rang. Jane. Mary's voice had an edge of excitement I hadn't heard before. Cancel whatever you're doing and come to my office. Now. When I arrived, Mary wasn't alone. She'd brought in Francis Gallo, a forensic accountant with bushy eyebrows and intense focus. Show her, Mary instructed him. Francis spread several documents across the conference table. Mrs. Westmore, the incorporation papers you provided indicate that you own 80% of Westmore Consulting Group, with your husband owning the remaining 20%. I stared at him in disbelief. That can't be right. We were equal partners. Francis shook his head. The paperwork clearly states an 80-20 split. See the ownership distribution clause here? He pointed to a section I'd completely forgotten about. The memory came flooding back. Henry had been concerned about potential liability from his previous employer, who had threatened legal action if he poached any clients. We'd structured the company with me as the majority owner as a precaution, intending to adjust the percentages later once the threat had passed, but we never did. For 25 years, Westmore Consulting Group had legally been 80% mine. The company now valued at over $40 million. The company with offices in 4 countries. The company that Henry believed belonged entirely to him. Mary smiled, a predatory gleam in her eyes. Jane, do you realize what this means? If Henry wants a divorce to be with his young assistant, he'll be the one walking away with very little. Unless you choose to be generous. I sat back in my chair, trying to process this information. All those years of supporting Henry, of believing I was helping build his dream. All those nights I'd stayed up editing proposals while he slept. All those weekends entertaining clients while he got the credit. What happens now? I asked quietly. Mary leaned forward. Now, we wait. We let Henry make the first move, and when he does, we'll be ready. I nodded slowly, a strange calm settling over me. For the first time since that anniversary dinner, I felt something other than hurt and betrayal. I felt powerful. The weeks following my discovery were a masterclass in acting. Each morning, I'd prepare Henry's favorite breakfast, 2 poached eggs on sourdough toast, black coffee with a half teaspoon of raw sugar, and we'd sit across from each other at our kitchen island, pretending nothing had changed. The Stevenson merger is almost finalized, he'd say between bites, never looking up from his tablet. Should close by the end of the month. I'd nod and make appropriate noises of approval. The Stevenson merger, a deal I'd helped research 18 months ago, identifying the small manufacturing company as an ideal acquisition target. I'd prepared the initial valuation models that Henry had presented to the board as his own work. Our evenings followed a similar pattern. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Henry would arrive home late, briefcase bulging with documents he claimed needed urgent attention. I'd serve dinner. Always his preferences, never mine. And he'd retreat to his home office, the door firmly closed. Sometimes my phone would buzz with messages from our mutual friends. Drinks Friday? Haven't seen you and Henry in ages. I'd make excuses, knowing Henry was telling them something different entirely. One Tuesday, I drove to the office to surprise Henry with lunch, something I hadn't done in months. The receptionist, Celia, looked startled when I walked in. "Mrs. Westmore, we weren't expecting you today." "I thought I'd surprise Henry," I said, holding up the bag from his favorite deli. Celia's eyes darted to the closed door of Henry's office. "He's, in a meeting right now, with Elizabeth, planning the Singapore trip." "I don't mind waiting," I said, settling into one of the lobby chairs. 20 minutes passed, then 30. At the 40-minute mark, Henry's office door finally opened. Elizabeth emerged first, smoothing down her skirt, cheeks flushed. Henry followed, his tie slightly askew. "Jane!" His surprise wasn't feigned. "What are you doing here?" "I brought lunch," I said, rising from my seat. "But I can see you're busy." Elizabeth had the decency to look embarrassed, mumbling something about expense reports before hurrying to her desk. Henry straightened his tie. "Let's eat in the conference room," he said stiffly. Over sandwiches neither of us wanted anymore, Henry launched into a monologue about the complexities of the Singapore negotiations, why Elizabeth's presence was essential, how I wouldn't understand the technical aspects of the deal. I nodded along, a supportive wife. But inside, I was cataloging every indignity. Every time he'd taken credit for my work. Every client who assumed I was just Henry's wife at company functions. Not the woman who'd written the business plan that secured their initial funding. Every Christmas bonus that went to junior associates while I received jewelry I never asked for. That evening, I contacted a realtor about our vacation property in the Hamptons, a beachfront cottage I'd inherited from my parents and had transferred to joint ownership when we married. The realtor's assessment came back at $3.2 million in the current market. "Has your husband approved the listing?" she asked over the phone. "He doesn't need to," I replied. "I'm just gathering information for now." Next, I called our financial advisor, Luke Davidson, and scheduled a private consultation. "Henry's looking to make some changes to our portfolio," I explained. "I'd like to understand our current positions before he meets with you." Luke, ever discreet, agreed without question. The following day, I sat in his office reviewing statements. For accounts I hadn't examined in years. Accounts with my name on them but that Henry had always managed. "This doesn't look right," I said, pointing to a series of transfers from our joint investment account to an LLC I didn't recognize. Luke frowned. "Henry said these were property investments you'd both agreed on." I smiled thinly. "Refresh my memory. When did these transfers begin?" "About 8 months ago. Regular withdrawals of $25,000. 8 months, precisely when Elizabeth had joined the company." "I'd like copies of all these statements, please," I said. "And I'd prefer if you didn't mention this meeting to Henry." Luke hesitated, his professional ethics visibly at war with his instincts. "Jane, is everything all right between you two?" "Perfectly fine," I assured him. "Just getting more involved in our finances. Henry's been carrying that burden alone for too long." That night, I added the financial statements to a growing file labeled Insurance in my desk drawer, a label I knew would never attract Henry's attention. The evidence of his betrayal was mounting, both personal and financial. Our son, Michael, called from his apartment in Boston the next day. He was in his final year of medical school, largely funded by Henry's generosity, or so Michael believed. Dad mentioned you might be feeling a bit down lately, he said cautiously. Something about empty nest syndrome? I almost laughed. Empty nest syndrome, Henry's convenient explanation for any change in my behavior. I'm fine, sweetheart, I assured him. Just reassessing some priorities. Dad also said you were asking questions about the company finances. He seemed concerned, so Henry was already laying groundwork, painting me as emotionally unstable, perhaps even irrational. Classic. Just taking an interest in our retirement planning, I said lightly. Nothing for either of you to worry about. After we hung up, I sat at my vanity, studying my reflection. At 48, I was still attractive. My mother's good genes had blessed me with high cheekbones and clear skin that required minimal maintenance. But I'd long ago stopped seeing myself as desirable, accepting Henry's gradual withdrawal of affection as an inevitable part of aging. Now I wondered if it had ever been about my appearance at all. Perhaps it was my competence that had become threatening. My occasional questions about the business, my suggestions about investment strategies that had often proved correct. The gradual erosion of my self-worth had been so subtle I hadn't noticed it happening. A dismissive comment here. An interrupted thought there. The way Henry would check his phone when I spoke at dinner parties, signaling to everyone present that my words weren't worth his attention. I opened my closet and surveyed its contents. Conservative suits for company functions, modest cocktail, dresses chosen to complement Henry, never to stand out. Sensible shoes that wouldn't make me taller than my husband. My wardrobe told the story of a woman who had been deliberately dimming her light for years. From the back of the closet, I pulled out a red dress I'd bought on impulse 3 years ago but had never worn. Henry had seen it hanging in my closet and raised an eyebrow. "A bit young for you, isn't it?" he'd said. I slipped it on now. The silk draped elegantly across my body, accentuating the figure I'd maintained through years of disciplined exercise. The woman in the mirror looked vibrant, powerful, nothing like the fading corporate wife Henry believed he'd married. I hung the dress on the outside of my closet door, a reminder of the woman I was about to become. Later that night, Henry came home even later than usual. A smudge of lipstick on his collar, not even trying to hide it anymore. The scent of unfamiliar perfume clung to his suit jacket. "Working late?" I asked, not looking up from my book. "The Singapore deal," he muttered, heading straight for the shower. As the water ran, I checked his jacket pockets, an invasion of privacy I would have considered beneath me just weeks ago. Inside, I found a receipt from the Peninsula Hotel. "Lunch for 2, charged to the company account." I photographed it with my phone, then returned it exactly as I'd found it. This too went into my evidence file. Another piece in the puzzle I was quietly assembling. It was a seemingly ordinary Thursday when everything shifted inside me. Henry had left for a business dinner without specifying when he'd return. I sat alone at our dining table, picking. At a meal I'd prepared for 2 when the doorbell rang. Sebastian Miller stood on our doorstep, holding a bottle of wine and looking surprised to see me. "Jane, I thought you and Henry were having dinner at our place tonight. Lana's been cooking all afternoon." Sebastian was Henry's oldest friend and business partner in several side ventures. His wife, Lana, and I had grown close over the years. Though our contact had diminished recently, another casualty of Henry's gradual isolation of me. "Henry told me he had a business dinner," I said slowly. "He didn't mention it was with you and Lana." Sebastian's expression shifted from confusion to discomfort. "Ah. Well, I'm sure there was a miscommunication. Anyway, since dinner at our house is apparently off, may I come in? Seems silly to waste a good bottle of Bordeaux." Over glasses of wine in the living room, Sebastian grew increasingly uncomfortable with my direct questions about the company, about Henry's recent behavior, about Elizabeth. "You know how it is, Jane," he said, swirling the wine in his glass. "Young talent brings new energy to a company. Henry's just mentoring her." Is that what they're calling it these days? Sebastian set his glass down. Look, Jane, I don't want to get in the middle of whatever's going on between you two. Nothing's going on, I said, except my husband is sleeping with his assistant, transferring our money into secret accounts, and lying to our friends about where he spends his evenings. But you already knew all that, didn't you? The color drained from Sebastian's face. Jane, How long have you been covering for him? Does Lana know? Sebastian's silence was answer enough. After he left, I sat alone in the darkened living room, a strange calm settling over me. The humiliation I'd been suppressing for months had transformed into something else entirely, a cold, clear determination. I'd spent 25 years being the perfect corporate wife, planning the dinner parties that secured the client relationships, editing the presentations that won the contracts, raising our now adult son mostly alone while Henry built his career on the foundation of my unseen labor. For years, I'd accepted the narrative that his success was a shared accomplishment, that my contribution, while invisible to others, was valued by the man who mattered most. What a convenient fiction that had been. The next morning, I called in a favor from an old college friend who now worked at a prestigious business school. Need to understand corporate structure and financial statements, I told her. Not the basics, I already know those. I need to understand how people hide assets, how they move money between entities. Planning a crime, Jane? She joked. Planning to uncover one, I replied, not laughing. She arranged for me to meet with a professor who specialized in forensic accounting. I spent 3 hours in his office, taking notes as he explained the various ways wealthy individuals concealed their assets. Shell companies, strategic undervaluation, artificial debt, offshore accounts. These techniques aren't necessarily illegal, he cautioned, but they often exist in gray areas. I nodded, thinking of the mystery LLC that had been receiving $25,000 monthly transfers from our joint account. And if someone wanted to track these movements, I asked, to create a clear picture of the actual ownership? He leaned forward. Then you'd need a very good forensic accountant and probably a lawyer who specializes in corporate structures. May I ask why you're interested in this? Academic curiosity, I said with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. That evening, as Henry worked late again, I went into his home office. I'd never invaded his private space before, an invisible boundary I'd respected throughout our marriage. But the woman who had honored those boundaries was disappearing a little more each day. His desk was meticulously organized, as always. Henry's external order had always contrasted with his internal chaos, a need for control that manifested in perfectly aligned pens and color-coded files. I didn't touch anything, just stood there absorbing the space where my husband spent so many hours. The framed photos on his credenza caught my eye. Henry shaking hands with the mayor, Henry receiving an industry award, Henry on the golf course with clients. Not a single photo of me. Not one of Michael. It was as if his family existed in a separate universe from his professional life. On the wall hung his diplomas and professional certifications. Harvard Business School, certified financial analyst, the credentials he'd worked so hard to accumulate. It struck me then that I had no equivalent wall of achievements, no framed evidence of my worth. My contributions existed only in the spaces between Henry's successes, the unseen scaffolding that had supported his rise. I walked out of his office and called Mary. I need your help with something else, I said when she answered. I want to understand exactly what my role has been in building Westmore Consulting, not just the incorporation documents, but everything since then. What do you mean? Mary asked. Emails. I've written for Henry. Presentations I've created. Client relationships I've nurtured. Research I've conducted. I've been his uncredited partner for 25 years, and I want to quantify that contribution. There was a pause on the line. Jane, are you thinking about more than just divorce? I'm thinking about justice, I replied. The next day, I went to our safety deposit box at the bank. Henry had always handled our important documents, but my name was on the account too. Inside, I found property deeds, insurance policies, and a folder labeled Corporate Archive. With hands that trembled slightly, I opened it to find early business. Plans for Westmore Consulting, documents I'd typed on our first computer, with Henry's handwritten notes in the margins. Strategy memos with both our inputs clearly visible. Copies of the initial client pitches we'd workshopped together at our kitchen table. Physical evidence of my partnership in building the company that Henry now claimed as exclusively his. I made copies of everything, then carefully returned the originals exactly as I'd found them. On the way home, I stopped at a specialty shop and purchased a high-quality voice recorder, small enough to fit in my purse. That night, when Henry finally came home, I was waiting in the living room. "We need to talk," I said simply. He sighed, loosening his tie. "Can it wait until tomorrow? I'm exhausted." "No," I said, my voice firmer than he'd ever heard it. "It can't." He sank into his armchair, irritation evident in every line of his body. "What is it, Jane?" "I want to know about the LLC that's receiving $25,000 from our joint account every month." His head jerked up, eyes narrowing. "You've been going through our finances?" "Our finances?" I repeated. "Yes, I have been looking at our finances. I'm curious about where our money is going. Is that unreasonable?" "It's a real estate investment vehicle," he said dismissively. "Nothing for you to worry about." "Is Elizabeth involved in this investment?" His face hardened. "What exactly are you implying?" "I think you know exactly what I'm implying, Henry. I know about you and Elizabeth. I know about the hotel lunches, the after-hours meetings, the Singapore trip." "You're being ridiculous," he snapped. "Elizabeth is a valuable employee. Nothing more." "Then you won't mind if I join you in Singapore," I said. "Since there's nothing inappropriate happening." He stood abruptly. "I don't have time for this paranoid nonsense. You've clearly been watching too many daytime soap operas." As he stormed toward the stairs, I felt something finally snap inside me. The last thread of deference, of willingness, to be gaslit and diminished. "I built this company too, Henry," I called after him. "Or have you forgotten that?" He turned slowly, and the contempt in his eyes was answer enough. "You typed some documents 25 years ago," he said coldly. "Don't delude yourself into thinking that makes you an entrepreneur." He disappeared upstairs, but his words hung in the air, the final confirmation of how little he valued my contribution to his life, his success, his empire. I sat motionless, in the darkened living room, my phone still recording in my purse. His dismissal had been the final piece I needed, not just evidence of his infidelity, but proof of his fundamental disrespect. His willingness to rewrite our shared history to erase my role entirely. I walked to my desk and pulled out my insurance file. Spreading the documents across the floor, I created a timeline of Henry's deceptions. Financial, emotional, professional, the pattern was undeniable and stretched back further than I'd initially realized. I picked up my phone and texted Mary, "I'm ready to move forward. Schedule the forensic accountant again. It's time to understand exactly what I own." The woman who had been content to live in Henry's shadow was gone. In her place stood someone new. Someone who would no longer accept less than she deserved. Someone who was about to rewrite the ending to this story. The next morning, I wore the red dress. Henry barely glanced at me as I entered the kitchen, his attention fixed on his phone. When he finally looked up, his double-take was almost comical. "You're wearing that? Where are you going?" "I have a lunch appointment," I said, pouring myself coffee. "With whom?" His tone carried an accusation, as if I was the one with something to hide. "An old friend," I replied, offering no further details. His eyes narrowed. "Which old friend?" I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Does it matter, Henry?" You'll be busy with the Stevenson merger today, won't you? This small act of resistance, withholding, information he felt entitled to, visibly rattled him. Good. My old friend was actually a former client of Westmore Consulting, Margaret Wilson, CEO of a pharmaceutical company that had been one of our first major accounts. I'd maintained a cordial relationship with her over the years, often chatting at industry events while Henry worked the room. We met at an upscale restaurant downtown, far from Henry's usual haunts. Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly at my attire, but she said nothing about it. "Jane, it's been too long," she said, embracing me warmly. "You look wonderful." "Thank you for meeting me," I said as we settled into our booth. "I know how busy you are." After ordering, I carefully steered the conversation toward the early days of her company's relationship with Westmore Consulting. "You know," Margaret said, swirling her wine, "Henry always insisted you review our contracts before they were finalized, said you had an eye for detail he couldn't match." I kept my expression neutral. "Did he?" "Oh, yes. He told me once that you'd saved Westmore from at least 3 potential lawsuits by catching problematic clauses the legal team had missed." She chuckled. "Said you were his secret weapon." "That's surprising," I managed. Margaret tilted her head. "Why? Surely you knew how much he relied on your input, especially in those early years." The truth was, I hadn't known. Henry had never shared these acknowledgments with me, only with clients when it served his purposes. To my face, he'd always minimized my contributions. "Margaret," I said carefully, "I'm trying to compile a portfolio of my professional contributions over the years. Would you be willing to write a brief statement about my role in your company's relationship with Westmore?" She looked surprised, but not suspicious. "Of course. You've been instrumental in maintaining our partnership. I still remember how you restructured our service agreement to save us nearly $1 million in the 3rd year. I'd forgotten about that. It had been a weekend project, with Michael battling a fever and Henry golfing with potential investors. I'd spotted a way to consolidate services that benefited both companies, and Henry had presented the solution as his own breakthrough. "Would you include that specific example?" I asked. "And anything else you can recall?" "Certainly. I'll email it to you by the end of the week." She paused. "Jane, are you planning a career move? Because if you're considering striking out on your own, Wilson Pharmaceuticals would be very interested in being your first client." The vote of confidence nearly brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you. I'm exploring options." Over the next 2 weeks, I contacted 7 more of Westmore's long-term clients, arranging discreet meetings away from the office. Each conversation revealed more instances where my behind-the-scenes work had been crucial to securing or maintaining accounts. James Thornton, head of a major retail chain, recalled how I'd smoothed over a potentially disastrous miscommunication. "Henry sent the wrong implementation timeline. Would have cost us millions during our peak season. You caught it, redid the entire project. Schedule overnight, and presented the solution so diplomatically that our board never realized the mistake." Victoria Chen remembered how I'd stepped in when Henry was hospitalized with appendicitis during crucial negotiations. "You handled those meetings flawlessly. We always wondered why you weren't officially part of the leadership team." Each testimonial went into my growing file. Each recollection built a clearer picture of my true role at Westmore Consulting. Not just Henry's supportive wife, but an uncredited partner whose work had been fundamental to the company's success. Mary was impressed when I shared these statements with her. "This is excellent, Jane. These testimonials establish your de facto role in the company, regardless of your official title. It strengthens our position considerably." But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Celia, the receptionist, contacted me through my personal email, an address I rarely used. "Mrs. Westmore, I hope you don't mind me reaching out this way. I've been troubled by something and thought you should know. Mr. Westmore has asked me to go through the company archives and remove certain documents, specifically anything with your handwriting or showing your involvement in client work. He said it's for streamlining the historical record before digitization, but it feels wrong. I've made copies of everything he's asking me to remove. If you'd like to see them, I can arrange a way to get them to you. I'm sorry if this is overstepping. I've always respected how kind you've been to staff when you visit, bringing holiday gifts and remembering our children's names when Mr. Westmore doesn't. Sincerely, Celia. I forwarded the email to Mary immediately. Her response was quick. Don't reply electronically. Call her from a secure line and arrange a meeting outside the office. The next day, I met Celia at a quiet cafe 3 towns over. She arrived with a large envelope tucked under her arm, nervously scanning the room before spotting me in a corner booth. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sliding into the seat. "I could lose my job for this." "I appreciate the risk you're taking," I assured her. "Whatever happens, I'll make sure you're protected." The envelope contained dozens of documents spanning 2 decades, strategy memos with my handwritten notes, client correspondence drafted in my distinctive style, presentation outlines bearing both our initials, early versions of the company, logo I'd sketched myself, physical proof of my partnership that Henry was actively trying to erase. "There's something else," Celia said hesitantly. "About the Singapore trip." I waited, my heart pounding. "It's not just Elizabeth going with him. They've booked 1 suite at the Marina Bay Sands." She swallowed hard. "And they've extended the trip to include a weekend in Bali afterward. Personal days, not on the company calendar." I nodded calmly, though rage pulsed behind my eyes. "Is there documentation of these arrangements?" She slid a travel itinerary across the table. "I made the bookings myself. Mr. Westmore insisted I use his personal credit card, not the company account." Another piece of evidence. Another nail in Henry's coffin. As I drove home, clutching the envelope of erased history, I felt a strange sense of validation. Henry wouldn't be working so hard to remove all traces of my involvement if he didn't recognize its significance. His attempts to rewrite our shared history were, ironically, the strongest testament to my true worth. 3 days before Henry's scheduled departure for Singapore, we received an invitation to the annual Business Leadership Gala, the most prestigious event in our city's corporate calendar. In previous years, I'd spent weeks preparing for it, selecting the perfect gown, elegant but not flashy, complementary to Henry's tuxedo, arranging hair and makeup appointments, rehearsing small talk about clients' families and hobbies. This year, the invitation had nearly been lost under Henry's scattered papers. I'd found it while organizing the mail he habitually ignored. "The gala is this Saturday," I mentioned casually over dinner. "Should I confirm our attendance?" Henry glanced up from his plate, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "I forgot about that. I'll be preparing for Singapore." "It's an important networking opportunity," I reminded him. "The Richardson account executives will be there." He considered this, clearly weighing the professional advantages against spending an evening with me. "Fine," he conceded. "Confirm for both of us." I sent the RSVP that evening, then scheduled an appointment at an exclusive boutique downtown, one where Henry's credit card was on file. If I was attending what might be my final corporate event as his wife, I would do so on my own terms. The night of the gala arrived. Henry had been distant all day, locked in his home office making preparations for his trip. When he emerged in his tuxedo, he looked almost surprised to see me waiting in the foyer, dressed in a gown of midnight blue silk that hugged my figure before flowing elegantly to the floor. "You look different," he said, a note of uncertainty. In his voice, I smiled. "Thank you." The drive to the Grand Plaza Hotel was silent. As we approached the venue, Henry finally spoke. "Stay close to the Andersons tonight. They're considering expanding their contract." I nodded. the familiar instructions washing over me. Stand beside these people. Laugh at their jokes. Remember, their children's names. Make them feel important so they'll give more business to Henry. As we entered the ballroom, I performed my usual role, smiling warmly at acquaintances, accepting air kisses from other corporate wives, strategically guiding Henry toward important contacts. The room glittered with wealth and power, champagne, flowing freely as the city's elite congratulated themselves on another successful year. Jane, Henry, wonderful to see you both. I turned to find Marcus Anderson approaching, his wife Sophia trailing slightly behind him. I greeted them warmly, complimenting Sophia's dress while Henry and Marcus immediately launched into business talk. "How are the children?" I asked Sophia, remembering my assigned task for the evening. "Emma just started at Princeton," she replied, beaming with maternal pride. "And Thomas is looking at law schools. Georgetown is his first choice." "That's wonderful," I said. "You must be so proud." As we chatted, I noticed a commotion near the entrance. Heads were turning, conversations pausing. Elizabeth Chen had arrived, wearing a dress that left little to the imagination, a shimmering gold column that caught the light with every movement. "Isn't that your husband's new assistant?" Sophia asked, following my gaze. "Yes," I said evenly. "Elizabeth." "Unusual to see an assistant at this event," she observed. "Those invitations are quite limited." Indeed they were. Each company received a specific allocation based on their standing in the business community. Junior staff were rarely included. I watched as Elizabeth made her way across the room, stopping to chat with several senior executives. She moved with the confidence of someone who belonged, not as an intimidated newcomer. Henry had spotted her, too. I could see him tracking her progress while pretending to listen to Marcus. When Elizabeth glanced in our direction, Henry gave a slight nod, almost imperceptible, but I caught it. 15 minutes later, Henry excused himself. "Need to say hello to the Jacobsons," he said, already moving away. I watched as he deliberately circled the room, greeting several people before, coincidentally, ending up beside Elizabeth at the bar. Their conversation appeared casual, professional even, but I noticed how his hand briefly touched the small of her back, how she leaned slightly closer than necessary to speak into his ear. "Would you excuse me for a moment?" I said to Sophia, who had been detailing her recent kitchen renovation. I made my way to the ladies' room, taking a circuitous route that allowed me to pass near Henry and Elizabeth without appearing to target them. As I approached, I heard snippets of their conversation. "All arranged. The car will pick us up at 7, Henry was saying. "I can't wait," Elizabeth replied, her voice low and intimate. 5 days away from—" They fell silent as they noticed me approaching. I smiled pleasantly. "Elizabeth, how lovely to see you here. I didn't realize assistants were included in our company allocation." Her cheeks flushed slightly. "Mr. Westmore thought it would be valuable for me to meet some of the clients I'll be working with in Singapore." "How thoughtful of him," I said, turning to Henry. "Darling, the Prescotts were asking for you. Something about that property development in Austin?" Henry's jaw tightened. "I'll find them in a moment." "Don't let me interrupt," I said, continuing toward the restroom. In the elegant powder room, I reapplied my lipstick with steady hands, though inside I was seething. It wasn't the affair itself that infuriated me in that moment. It was the sheer arrogance of flaunting it at an event where everyone knew me, where my dignity was being publicly compromised. When I returned to the main ballroom, I sought out Margaret Wilson, who greeted me warmly. "Jane, I was hoping to see you tonight. I sent that statement you requested." "Thank you, Margaret. It was extremely helpful." "I meant what I said about working with you directly," she continued, lowering her voice. "If you're considering your options." From across the room, I could see Henry watching our conversation with growing suspicion. His networking had been abandoned. His attention now fully focused on my interaction with one of Westmore's biggest clients. The evening progressed with the usual formalities: dinner, speeches, awards. Henry received recognition for visionary leadership and consulting, accepting the Crystal Trophy with practiced humility, thanking his dedicated team while never once acknowledging my presence at his table. As dessert was served, the evening's most prestigious honor was announced: the Lifetime Achievement Award. The recipient was Rebecca Sterling, founder of Sterling Industries and a pioneer for women in business. At 72, she had built a global empire and mentored countless female executives. "Success is never achieved alone," Rebecca said in her acceptance speech. "But women's contributions are often invisible, uncredited, or deliberately erased. I stand here today because I refuse to accept that erasure." Her words resonated through me like a physical vibration. I glanced at Henry, who was checking his watch impatiently. After the formalities concluded, as guests mingled and the orchestra played, Henry appeared at my side. "I have some business to discuss with Richardson. Wait for me by the coat check in 20 minutes. Not a request, an order. 20 minutes later, I stood by the coat check as instructed. 30 minutes. 45. Guests were departing in steady streams. Still no Henry. Finally, I received a text. "Got caught up. Take an Uber home. I'll be late." I stepped outside into the cool night air, a strange calm settling over me. This small humiliation, being abandoned at an event, left to find my own way home while my husband disappeared with his mistress, was a perfect crystallization of our entire marriage. It was nothing compared to the years of erasure, the systematic devaluation of my contributions, the gradual dismantling of my self-worth. But somehow this one incident distilled it all into its purest form. I didn't call an Uber. Instead, I called Mary. "It's time," I said when she answered. "Tell the forensic accountant to prepare everything. I'm ready to move forward." "Are you sure?" she asked. "Absolutely," I replied. "Henry has a flight to Singapore on Tuesday. I want everything in place before he returns." As I hung up, I felt no anger, no hurt, only a cool, clear purpose. This night had given me the final push I needed. The woman who obediently waited by coat checks was gone forever. The morning after the gala, I woke early. Henry hadn't returned until after 3 a.m., slipping into bed without a word, as if I might be asleep rather than lying awake, planning my next moves. Now he slumbered beside me, oblivious to the transformation occurring in his own home. I studied, his face in repose. The lines around his mouth had deepened over the years, but he was still handsome in that polished corporate way that had first attracted me when we met at university. I'd been 22 then, a business student with the highest GPA in my class. Henry had been 25, already working at a prestigious consulting firm, guest lecturing in my advanced strategic management course. He'd singled me out after noticing my insightful questions, invited me for coffee to discuss career opportunities. I still remembered the pride I'd felt when this successful, charismatic man had shown interest in my intellect, in my potential. How flattering it had been when he'd asked to see my thesis on emerging Asian markets, a paper that, in retrospect, had formed the foundation of Westmore Consulting's initial expansion strategy. We'd married a year later. I'd abandoned my plans for an MBA at Wharton, choosing instead to support Henry's career while we started a family. "You can always go back to school later," he'd assured me, "once we're established." Later never came. Instead, Michael arrived. Then Henry left his firm to start Westmore Consulting, and I became his unpaid researcher, strategist, and editor. The business consumed our lives, and my own ambitions receded further with each passing year. I slipped out of bed without waking him and made my way to the spare bedroom, the one I'd claimed as my private space after discovering his affair. From the closet, I retrieved a dusty portfolio case I hadn't opened in years. Inside were the remnants of my abandoned dreams, sketches for a luxury resort concept I'd developed after noticing a gap in the Vietnamese tourism market. Business plans for a consulting firm specializing in women-owned businesses in developing economies. Applications for executive MBA programs I'd filled out but never submitted. The most painful item was a letter from Elena Joe, my former professor, who had become a leading figure in international business development. Dated 15 years ago, it was an offer to join her team at a global economic foundation. Your analysis of microfinance opportunities in Southeast Asian economies is precisely the kind of forward-thinking approach we need, she had written. This position would involve extensive travel, but would put you at the forefront of shaping economic policy for the next decade. I'd shown the letter to Henry, excited at the prospect of reigniting my career while our son was in elementary school. It's an incredible opportunity, I'd told him. They're even willing to work around Michael's school schedule. Henry had frowned, skimming the letter. Jane, be realistic. This would require weeks abroad. Who would handle things at home? Besides, I need your help with the Jensen proposal. We could hire help, I'd suggested. Or your mother could stay with us when I travel. My mother has her own life, he'd replied dismissively. And you know I don't like strangers in our home. Besides, this foundation pays practically nothing compared to what Westmore brings in. It makes no financial sense. The discussion had ended there. I'd drafted a polite refusal to Elena, citing family obligations, and filed away the letter along with my other deferred ambitions. Now, as I traced my fingers over Elena's signature, I wondered how different my life might have been if I'd insisted, if I'd pursued what I wanted instead of what was convenient for Henry. On impulse, I searched for Elena online, curious about where her career had taken her. The results were impressive. She now headed a major international development bank, her influence extending across continents. A recent article quoted her views on financial inclusion strategies in emerging markets, ideas startlingly similar to those I'd outlined in my original thesis. I found her email address on the bank's website and, before I could reconsider, wrote her a brief message. Elena, you may not remember me, but I was your student at Wharton 25 years ago. You once offered me a position at the Global Economic Foundation, which I regretfully declined due to family commitments. I'm writing to ask if you'll be in New York in the coming weeks. I find myself at a professional crossroads and would value your perspective. Warm regards, Jane Westmore. I hit send before doubt could stop me, then turned back to the portfolio. Beneath my business plans lay a prospectus for a women's investment cooperative I'd conceptualized 10 years ago, a network of female investors funding women-owned businesses. I'd researched similar models in Sweden and Australia, adapting their structures for the American market. When I'd mentioned the idea to Henry, he'd laughed. Jane, that's adorable, he'd said, patting my hand as if indulging a child's fantasy. But women's investment clubs are glorified book clubs with checkbooks. No serious entrepreneur would seek funding from such a group. I'd abandoned the project, convinced by his dismissal that it was merely a naive fantasy rather than a viable business model. Now, with fresh eyes, I reviewed my research and financial projections. The concept was solid, the market need evident. Another dream sacrificed on the altar of Henry's ego. My phone chimed with an incoming email. To my surprise, it was from Elena. Jane, of course I remember you. Your thesis on Asian markets was years ahead of its time. I've often wondered what became of you after you declined my offer. As it happens, I'll be in New York next week for meetings at the UN. Could you join me for dinner on Thursday? I'm always interested in new perspectives, especially from someone with your analytical abilities. Warm regards, Elena. My heart raced as I typed my reply, confirming the dinner and suggesting a restaurant. Then I returned to my portfolio of discarded ambitions, spreading the documents across the bed. Each abandoned dream, each deferred opportunity represented a piece of myself I'd willingly surrendered. Not just to support Henry, but because I'd internalized his judgment of what I was capable of achieving. I heard movement in the master bedroom. Henry was awake. I quickly gathered my papers, returning them to the portfolio case, but not before setting aside the women's investment cooperative proposal. That one, I decided, deserved a second look. When I entered the kitchen, Henry was already there, scrolling through his phone while the coffee brewed. "You disappeared early," he remarked, not looking up. "I had some things to review," I replied, pouring myself a cup. "About last night," he began, his tone that of a man preparing a plausible explanation. "The Richardson meeting ran late, and then several of us continued discussions at the hotel bar." "Of course," I said mildly. "How's Elizabeth this morning?" His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing at all," I replied, sipping my coffee. "I assume she was part of the Richardson discussion, since she's going to Singapore." He relaxed slightly. "Yes, she was there." "Good," I said. "I'm glad your protégé is getting valuable experience." Henry studied me for a moment, trying to gauge whether there was a hidden meaning behind my words. Finding none he could definitively object to, he returned to his phone. "I'll be at the office today," he said. "Final preparations for the trip." "Of course," I replied. "I have plans as well." This caught his attention. "What plans?" "Just exploring." "Some options," I said vaguely. As he left for the office, I returned to the spare bedroom and reopened the Women's Investment Cooperative proposal. With a fresh notebook beside me, I began updating the concept, incorporating developments in fintech and social impact investing that had emerged in the decade since I'd originally developed it. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of genuine excitement, not about revenge or justice, though those would come, but about creation, about building something that was entirely mine. The woman Henry had married, bright, ambitious, full of ideas, hadn't disappeared after all. She'd simply been waiting for the right moment to re-emerge. Monday morning, the day before Henry's departure for Singapore, I pulled into the parking garage of First National Bank in downtown Manhattan. Not our usual bank, which handled the Westmore corporate accounts and our joint finances, but a different institution where I'd never set foot before. I smoothed down my skirt, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, and gathered the documents. I'd prepared over the weekend. The weight of the manila folder in my hands felt significant, like the first stone laid in a new foundation. Inside, I was greeted by an elegantly dressed woman in her 50s. "Mrs. Westmore, I'm Diane Hughes, Senior VP of Private Banking. Please, come to my office." I followed her down a carpeted hallway to a corner office with sweeping views of the city. As I settled into a leather chair, Diane offered me coffee and then sat across from me, hands folded on her immaculate desk. "I understand from our preliminary conversation that you're interested in establishing accounts independent from your current financial arrangements," she said. "That's correct." I opened my folder and passed her the documents I'd prepared. Proof of identity, tax returns I'd filed jointly with Henry, bank statements, and property deeds. "I need to establish secure financial mechanisms that can't be accessed or monitored by my husband." Diane's expression remained neutral, but I could see understanding in her eyes. She'd clearly handled similar situations before. "And you mentioned, you're expecting significant assets to be transferred into these accounts in the near future?" "Yes, the exact amount is still being determined, but it could reach 8 figures. She nodded, making notes. "We'll set up a checking account, savings account, and investment portfolio today. I recommend we also establish a trust. It provides additional legal protection should circumstances become contentious." "They likely will," I admitted. For the next hour, I signed papers, provided signatures, created secure passwords, and arranged for biometric verification. Every step felt like reclaiming a small piece of my autonomy. When we finished, Diane handed me a folder with my new account information and a sleek black credit card with just my name embossed on it. This card is connected to a preliminary line of credit based on your individual credit score, which is excellent, she explained. Once your assets are transferred, we'll adjust the limits accordingly. I ran my finger over the raised letters of my name, just Jane Westmore, not Mrs. Henry Westmore, the identity I'd carried for 25 years. The distinction felt profoundly meaningful. There's one more thing, I said, pulling out the Women's Investment Cooperative proposal I'd updated over the weekend. I'd like to discuss establishing this as a formal business entity once my financial situation is stabilized. Diane took the document, scanning it with interest. This is an intriguing concept. Once your personal finances are secured, I'd be happy to connect you with our business banking department. We actually have several initiatives focused on women in finance that might align perfectly with your vision. I left the bank with a strange lightness in my step. For the first time in decades, I had financial instruments that were exclusively mine, a small but crucial step toward independence. My next stop was a luxury apartment building in Tribeca, where I'd arranged to meet a realtor. Catherine Reynolds was waiting in the gleaming lobby, tablet in hand. "Mrs. Westmore, lovely to meet you," she said, shaking my hand. "I have 3 properties to show you today, all meeting your specifications." I nodded, following her to the elevator. "And you understand the confidentiality requirements?" "Absolutely. All viewings are recorded under my company's name, not yours. No digital trail." The first apartment was on the 32nd floor, a corner unit with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the Hudson River. 2 bedrooms, sleek modern kitchen, marble bathrooms, and a private terrace. "This one was just renovated," Catherine explained as we walked through. "The owner is relocating to London and needs to close quickly." I moved through the space, trying to imagine myself living here, waking up to these views, working at the built-in desk in the 2nd bedroom, sipping coffee on the terrace. A life entirely my own, undefined by Henry's preferences or needs. "What's the asking price?" I asked, running my hand along the cool marble countertop. $3.2 million, but the owner is motivated, so there's flexibility. A year ago, the idea of spending millions on a property would have seemed incomprehensible. But after seeing the forensic accountant's preliminary valuation of my share in Westmore Consulting, approximately $32 million, this purchase represented a reasonable investment in my future. "I'd like to make an offer," I said decisively. $2.9 million, contingent on a 30-day close and absolute confidentiality. Catherine's eyes widened slightly at my directness. "I'll present it this afternoon, after viewing the other properties, both lovely but not quite right." I returned to my car and checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Henry and a text. "Where are you?" "Need to discuss Singapore arrangements before I leave tomorrow." I ignored them and instead called Mary, my attorney. "Everything's in place," I told her when she answered. "I've established independent banking and made an offer on an apartment." "Good," Mary said. "Francis has completed the forensic accounting. When can you come in to review the findings?" "Tomorrow morning," I replied, "after Henry leaves for the airport." "Perfect. And we're still proceeding with the original timeline? Filing when he returns from Singapore?" "Yes," I confirmed. "I want everything ready, but I'll wait until he's back on U.S. soil." "Smart, Mary." Agreed. No international complications that way. As I drove home, I considered the irony of my situation. For years, I'd handled the practical details of our life together, managing the household, raising our son, supporting Henry's career. I'd applied those same organizational skills to planning my exit, methodical, thorough, leaving nothing to chance. Henry was in the kitchen when I arrived home, packing food into a cooler. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "I've been calling." "You?" "I had appointments," I said, setting down my purse. "What's all this?" "Dinner for the Richardsons. They invited us to their lake house tonight. Last strategy session before Singapore. I've been trying to reach you for hours." "I have plans tonight," I said calmly. Henry froze, the look of disbelief on his face almost comical. In 25 years of marriage, I had never refused a client dinner, never prioritized my own schedule over his professional needs. What do you mean you have plans? This is the Richardson account, Jane. It's worth millions to the company. I understand, I said. But I made a commitment I can't break. What commitment could possibly be more important than this? His voice rose incredulously. I'm having dinner with Elena Zhou. Who the hell is Elena Zhou? My former professor from Wharton, the one who offered me the position at the Global Economic Foundation 15 years ago. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed quickly by suspicion. Why are you meeting with her now, after all this time? I met his gaze steadily. Because she asked about my career, and I realized I didn't have an answer. For a moment, Henry seemed genuinely stumped, as if the concept of me having independent professional aspirations was so foreign he couldn't process it. We'll discuss this when I get back from Singapore, he finally said, his tone suggesting I was being childishly rebellious. For tonight, call this professor person and reschedule. The Richardsons are expecting us. No, I said simply. The single word hung between us like a physical barrier. Henry stared at me, confusion giving way to anger. What did you say? I said no, Henry. I'm not canceling my dinner with Elena. You can tell the Richardsons I send my regrets. His face darkened. What's gotten into you lately? First the questions about company finances, then your behavior at the gala. Now this? Is this some kind of midlife crisis? I almost laughed at his predictable dismissal. I'm exploring options, Henry. Professional options. Professional options? He repeated incredulously. At your age? After being out of the workforce for 25 years, there it was, the fundamental truth of how he saw me. Not as a partner who had contributed to building his business, but as an aging housewife with no marketable skills. Yes, Henry, professional options. I turned to leave the kitchen, then paused in the doorway. And for the record, I haven't been out of the workforce for 25 years. I've been working for Westmore Consulting the entire time, just without recognition or compensation. I left him standing there, mouth slightly open, as I headed upstairs to prepare for my dinner with Elena. The first overt act of independence in my carefully orchestrated plan. The woman who had always said yes was learning how powerful the word no could be. Elena had chosen Daniel, a discreet upscale restaurant in Midtown known for its private booths and exceptional wine list. I arrived 15 minutes early, a habit ingrained from years of making sure everything was perfect before Henry entered any situation. I spotted her immediately, a striking woman in her early 60s with silver-streaked black hair cut in a sharp bob. She rose to greet me, her handshake firm and confident. "Jane, you haven't changed a bit," she said warmly, though we both knew it wasn't true. 25 years had transformed us both. "Neither have you," I replied with a smile. "Still intimidating first-year students with impossibly complex case studies?" She laughed. "Only on Tuesdays. The rest of the time I'm intimidating world leaders with impossibly complex economic policies." As we settled into our booth, I felt a strange blend of nostalgia and regret. This woman represented the path not taken, the career I might have had, if I'd made different choices. "So," Elena said after we'd ordered, "your email mentioned a professional crossroads. I'm intrigued." I took a deep breath. I'm preparing to leave my husband, and in doing so, I'm reclaiming my stake in the business. We built together. Westmore Consulting. Her eyebrows rose slightly, but she showed no other reaction. "Tell me more." For the next hour, I outlined my situation. The years of unacknowledged work, the discovery of Henry's affair, the revelation about my ownership percentage, and my plans for the future. The forensic accountant's report shows I own 80% of a company, valued at approximately $40 million, I explained. Once the divorce is filed, I'll have financial security. But I want more than money, Elena. I want purpose. Meaning. She nodded thoughtfully. And the women's investment cooperative concept you mentioned? Is that where you see your future? Potentially. I believe there's a significant market opportunity in connecting female investors with women-owned startups. But I've been out of the formal business world for so long, I'm not sure I have the credibility to lead such an initiative. Elena's eyes sharpened. Jane, you built a $40 million consulting firm that operates in 4 countries. The fact that you did it without a title or compensation doesn't diminish the achievement. Her words struck a chord. I'd been so accustomed to minimizing my contributions that I'd internalized Henry's dismissive view of my capabilities. What I need, I said, is guidance on re-entering the professional world with confidence, on positioning myself not as Henry, Westmore's soon-to-be ex-wife, but as a business leader in my own right. Elena leaned forward. I have a proposition for you. The International Women's Finance Initiative is launching next month, a global program to increase female participation in economic leadership. We need advisors with practical experience in building businesses. Would you be interested? But I don't have formal credentials, I protested. You have something more valuable. 25 years of hands-on experience in growing a successful international consultancy. Experience most credentialed academics can't match. By the time we parted, ways 3 hours later, I had agreed to join the advisory board of the initiative once my divorce was finalized. Elena had also introduced me via text to 3 venture capitalists who specialized in women-led startups, all of whom expressed interest in my investment cooperative concept. I drove home feeling more alive than I had in decades, energized by the possibilities opening before me, by the validation from someone whose opinion I respected. For the first time, I could envision a future that wasn't defined by my relationship to Henry. As I pulled into our driveway, I noticed lights still on in the house. Henry was usually in bed by now, especially before an international trip. I entered, quietly, setting down my purse in the foyer. Where the hell have you been? Henry's voice startled me. He stood in the darkened living room, a tumbler of scotch in his hand. From his flushed face and slightly unsteady posture, I could tell it wasn't his first. I told you, I had dinner with Elena Joe. Until midnight? He demanded, glancing pointedly at the clock. We had a lot to catch up on, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. How was the dinner with the Richardsons? A disaster, he spat. Daniel Richardson asked specifically about you, wanted your perspective on the market expansion. Strategy since you'd identified the original opportunity. I blinked in surprise. I had indeed spotted the potential in the Southeast Asian markets that the Richardson account was now exploring, but I'd never imagined Daniel Richardson knew of my involvement. I had to make excuses for your absence, Henry continued, his voice eyeing. Had to pretend you were ill rather than admit you were off reminiscing with some academic nobody. Elena Joe is hardly a nobody, I replied calmly. She's the director of... I don't care if she's the Queen of England, he interrupted. Your priority should be this family and this business. I built this company from nothing, and you're jeopardizing a major account because of some ridiculous midlife identity crisis. The familiar indignation rose within me, the automatic urge to apologize, to smooth things over, to prioritize his feelings and needs over my own. But this time, I recognized it for what it was. Conditioning. Years of emotional manipulation that had trained me to doubt myself and defer to him. You didn't build this company from nothing, Henry, I said quietly. We built it together. My work, my ideas, my support made it possible. The fact that you've never acknowledged that doesn't make it any less true. He stared at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. What are you talking about? You've been a housewife since Michael was born. A housewife who wrote the business plan that secured our initial funding, who developed the client management system the company still uses, who researched the Asian markets that the Richardson account is now exploring. Henry's expression shifted from confusion to contempt. You helped with some paperwork in the early days. That hardly makes you a founding partner. Actually, it does. Legally and ethically. His eyes narrowed. What have you been doing, Jane? Going through old company records? Talking to lawyers? I met his gaze steadily. Getting clarity about my contributions and their value. He laughed harshly. Their value? Let me tell you about value, Jane. Value is created by people who show up every day, who close deals, who put their names and reputations on the line, not by housewives who occasionally edit a document or sit quietly at client dinners. Each dismissive word strengthened my resolve. I didn't argue further. There was no point. Henry was incapable of seeing me as an equal, of acknowledging my worth beyond the supporting role he'd assigned me. Your flight is at 8 a.m., I said instead. You should get some sleep. His face darkened. Don't change the subject. We're discussing your increasingly erratic behavior, and I want to know what's behind it. Are you seeing someone? Is that what this is about? The irony was almost laughable. No, Henry. Unlike you, I've honored our marriage vows. His expression confirmed what I already knew. He'd never suspected I was aware of his affair. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across his face. Then his arrogance reasserted itself. We'll finish this discussion when I return, he said dismissively. I expect you to use this time to reconsider your priorities and to be available for the video conference with the Singapore team on Thursday. I didn't answer, simply turned, and headed upstairs. Behind me, I heard the clink of the scotch bottle against his glass as he poured another drink. In the guest bedroom, I methodically laid out my clothes for the morning meeting with Mary, a power suit I'd purchased specifically for this new chapter in my life. Then I set my alarm, ensuring I'd be awake to confirm Henry's departure before heading downtown to review the finalized forensic report. The confrontation had been unpleasant but necessary, a clear indication that reconciliation was neither possible nor desirable. Henry would never see me as an equal partner deserving of respect. His perception of me was fixed, immutable, but I no longer needed his recognition to know my own worth. I woke before my alarm, the pale light of dawn filtering through. The curtains! For a moment, I lay still, listening to the sounds of Henry preparing for his trip, the shower running, dresser drawers opening and closing, the soft thud of his suitcase being lifted from the closet shelf. There was a time when I would have been up before him, laying out his travel clothes, preparing his favorite breakfast, double-checking his itinerary, the perfect corporate wife, ensuring his comfort and success down to the smallest detail. Today, I remained in bed, savoring the knowledge that this was the last time Henry would leave this house as my husband. By the time he returned from Singapore, everything would be in place for me to end our marriage on my terms. Eventually, I rose and dressed in casual clothes. I would change into my power suit after he left. When I entered the kitchen, Henry was there, scrolling through his phone while sipping coffee from a travel mug. Your car service should be here in 20 minutes, I said, pouring myself a cup. He glanced up, clearly surprised that I'd bothered, to check his schedule. Yes. An awkward silence fell between us. After 25 years of marriage, we had become strangers, the comfortable rhythms of our shared life disrupted by truths too long unacknowledged. Jane, he finally said, setting down his phone. About last night. I may have been harsh. It wasn't an apology. Henry rarely apologized outright, but it was as close as he ever came. Yes, you were, I agreed calmly. He frowned, clearly expecting me to smooth things over as I always had before. When I didn't, he continued with forced reasonableness. Look, I understand you're going through something right now. Maybe it's hormonal, maybe it's some kind of delayed empty nest syndrome since Michael's been gone. Whatever it is, we can address it when I get back. I merely nodded, refusing to engage with his condescending armchair psychology. My silence clearly unsettled him. While I'm gone, he continued, I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't contact any more clients. Your dinner with Elena is one thing, but the business relationships need to be handled properly. Of course, I said mildly. I had no need to contact clients now. I had gathered all the testimonials and evidence I required. He looked relieved, misinterpreting my compliance as submission. Good. And if you could review the Singapore presentation, it's in my study. There are a few sections that could use your editing touch. The irony wasn't lost on me. Even now, as he dismissed my contributions to the company, he was asking me to improve his work. I'll look at it, I promised, though we both knew I wouldn't. His phone chimed with a text. Car's here, he said, standing and gathering his things. I'll call when I land. He hesitated, then leaned in for a perfunctory kiss on my cheek. A habit rather than an expression of affection. I allowed it, knowing it would be the last time. As the front door closed behind him, I exhaled slowly, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. The house seemed immediately larger, the air clearer. I walked to the window and watched his car pull away from the curb, carrying Henry toward his mistress, and what he imagined would be a pleasurable week of business and betrayal. Little did he know that his comfortable world was about to implode. I showered quickly, then dressed in the charcoal gray suit I'd purchased for this new chapter in my life. The woman in the mirror looked powerful, decisive, a far cry from the accommodating wife who had faded into the background of Henry's life. At 9:30, I walked into Mary's law office, where Frances, the forensic accountant, was already waiting. Mary greeted me with a firm handshake, her expression suggesting she had news. Jane, we've made some additional discoveries since our last meeting, she said, gesturing for me to take a seat at the conference table. Francis opened his laptop, turning the screen so I could see the spreadsheets and documents he had compiled. Mrs. Westmore, as we discussed previously, the incorporation documents clearly show you own 80% of Westmore Consulting, he began. But our deeper analysis of the company's financial structure revealed something else. He pulled up a complex diagram showing a network of LLCs and subsidiary companies. Over the past 8 months, significant assets have been transferred from Westmore's main accounts into these entities, approximately $4.2 million in total. The LLC receiving $25,000 monthly transfers, I murmured, remembering what I'd seen in our financial records. Yes, but there's more, Francis continued. That particular LLC, Meridian Holdings, is just one of several. We've identified 6 separate entities, all established within the last year, all receiving regular transfers from Westmore's accounts. Mary leaned forward. Jane, this is classic divorce planning. Henry's been systematically moving assets into entities he controls exclusively, preparing to minimize your settlement. I felt a cold fury building inside me. Not just an affair, then, but a calculated financial betrayal as well. Henry had been planning to leave me, or to ensure I got as little as possible if I left him. Can we recover those assets? I asked. Absolutely, Francis assured me. These transfers constitute fraudulent dissipation of marital assets. Once we file, the court will almost certainly freeze all these accounts and eventually order the funds returned to Westmore's primary holdings. There's something else, Mary added. We've been monitoring Henry's private email as part of discovery. She slid a folder across the table. These messages between Henry and Elizabeth discuss more than just their affair. They explicitly talk about establishing a new consulting firm once they're free of entanglements. I opened the folder, my hand steady despite my shock. There, in black and white, was evidence that Henry and Elizabeth were planning to steal clients from Westmore and start a competing business. The Singapore trip, I realized. It's not just about the Richardson account. They're laying groundwork for their new venture. Mary nodded grimly. It appears so, which gives us additional legal leverage. Corporate rating, breach of fiduciary duty, Misappropriation of trade secrets. These are serious violations that go beyond the divorce proceeding. What do you recommend? I asked. Mary's expression was resolute. We need to move fast. I suggest we file for divorce immediately, request emergency orders freezing all the hidden accounts, and notify the board of directors about the corporate malfeasance. But Henry's out of the country, I pointed out. I thought we were waiting until he returned. That was before we discovered the extent of his financial maneuvers and corporate espionage, Mary explained. There's too much at risk now. If we wait, he could transfer more assets offshore or begin approaching clients directly. I considered this for a long moment. Filing while Henry was abroad would be seen as aggressive, even hostile. It would eliminate any possibility of an amicable separation. Not that such a possibility truly existed anymore. But the evidence before me showed that Henry had already declared war. He had been methodically preparing to discard me, professionally and personally, while ensuring I received as little as possible of the company we'd built together. Do it, I said firmly. File today, freeze everything, and notify the board. Mary nodded, already reaching for her phone to set the machinery in motion. I'll have the papers filed within the hour. The emergency hearing for the asset freeze is scheduled for tomorrow morning. As I signed the divorce petition, my name sharp and clear against the sterile legal document, I felt an unexpected sense of liberation. This was the point of no return, the moment I formally rejected the life I'd been living and claimed the, quote, right to create something new. What happens now? I asked as Mary's assistant took the signed documents. Now, Mary said with grim satisfaction, we wait for Henry to discover that his carefully constructed house of cards is collapsing. I expect we'll hear from him shortly after the board meeting tomorrow afternoon. I nodded, picturing Henry's face when he realized that his secret plans had been exposed, that the wife he'd underestimated for decades had outmaneuvered him. Wouldn't be a pretty conversation, but for the first time in our marriage, I would be the one holding all the power. The first call came at 3:17 a.m., Henry's name flashing on my phone screen, illuminating the darkness of my bedroom. I watched it ring, feeling oddly detached, as if observing someone else's life unfolding. When it finally stopped, I checked the time in Singapore, 3:17 p.m. there. The board meeting would have just concluded. 6 more calls followed in rapid succession. Then a flurry of text messages. What the hell have you done? Call me immediately. You have no idea what you've set in motion. The board has suspended me pending investigation. Over lies. I turned my phone to silent mode and placed it on my nightstand. Henry's rage could wait until morning. Tonight I would sleep peacefully in our home for the last time. When I woke, there were 27 missed calls and 43 text messages. The most recent, sent just minutes earlier, had a different tone. Jane, please. We need to talk about this. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. I smiled at his predictable pivot from fury to manipulation. When intimidation failed, Henry always resorted to reason, presenting himself as the voice of sanity amid confusion. I showered, dressed in a silk blouse and tailored pants, and packed an overnight bag. The movers would come tomorrow for the rest of my belongings. But for now, I was headed to the Tribeca apartment. My offer had been accepted, and although the closing was still weeks away, the owner had agreed to a short-term lease in the interim, an arrangement facilitated by Catherine's skilled negotiation. Before leaving, I walked through the house one last time. This space had been the backdrop to 20 years of my life. The gracious colonial in Westchester, where we'd moved after Michael was born, where I'd hosted countless dinner parties for Henry's clients, where I'd quietly contributed to the growth of Westmore Consulting from the shadow of my home office. In the kitchen, I paused to touch the granite countertops I'd selected, the Viking range where I'd prepared thousands of meals. In the living room, my fingers trailed across the spines of books on shelves I'd arranged, past photographs I'd framed, visual evidence of a life carefully constructed to showcase Henry's success. Upstairs, I lingered in Michael's empty bedroom. He was completing his final year of medical school in Boston, blissfully unaware of the seismic shifts occurring in his parents' lives. I'd call him tonight, once I was settled in the new apartment. The conversation wouldn't be easy, but Michael was an adult now, capable of understanding that relationships sometimes end, that people evolve in different directions. In the master bedroom, I opened my jewelry box and removed the few pieces that held sentimental value: my grandmother's pearls, the sapphire earrings my parents had given me for my college graduation. The rest, the diamonds and gold that had been Henry's substitute for genuine appreciation over the years, I left behind. They had always been compensation, not gifts of love. As I descended the stairs for the final time, my phone rang again. Not Henry this time, but Mary. "Jane," she said when I answered, "the emergency order has been granted. All the accounts are frozen, including the offshore ones. Henry can't access any of the transferred funds." "Has he contacted you?" I asked, stepping outside and locking the door behind me. "His lawyer called an hour ago," Mary replied, a note of satisfaction in her voice. "They're demanding an immediate meeting to clear up this unfortunate situation. And I told them we'd be happy to meet when Henry returns from Singapore. In the meantime, the restraining order remains in effect. He cannot make any financial decisions regarding Westmore Consulting without board approval." "How did the board react?" I asked, placing my bag in the trunk of my car. "Better than expected. Apparently, several members had concerns about some of Henry's recent decisions. The evidence of his plans to establish a competing firm with Elizabeth confirmed their suspicions. I felt a surge of vindication. And my ownership stake? No one is disputing it. The documentation is clear, and with the testimony from early clients about your role in establishing the company, your position is legally unassailable. As I drove toward Manhattan, a weight seemed to lift from my shoulders with each mile that separated me from our Westchester home. The sky was impossibly blue, the October trees ablaze with color I hadn't truly noticed in years. My apartment, was on the 32nd floor of a sleek glass tower overlooking the Hudson River. Catherine met me in the lobby, keycard in hand. "Everything's ready," she said, escorting me to the private elevator. The owner left some basics in the refrigerator, and I took the liberty of having flowers delivered. The apartment was even more beautiful than I remembered from my viewing. Sunlight, streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the hardwood floors and pristine white walls. The furniture was minimal but elegant, the kitchen gleaming with high-end appliances I had yet to learn how to use. On the dining table stood an arrangement of white orchids with a note from Catherine. "To new beginnings." I wandered through the space, absorbing the sensation of being surrounded by choices that were entirely mine. No need to consider Henry's preferences, to anticipate his criticism, to shrink my presence to accommodate his ego. For dinner, I ordered Thai food, spicy green curry that Henry had always refused to try, and ate it on the terrace, watching the sunset paint the river gold. As darkness fell, the city lights emerged like stars, a constellation of possibilities spreading before me. My phone rang again. Henry, for the 30th time that day. On impulse, I answered. "Jane." His voice was tightly controlled, the fury barely contained beneath a veneer of reasonableness. "This has gone far enough. You've made your point." "Have I?" I asked calmly. "Look, I understand you're upset about Elizabeth. It was a mistake, a stupid midlife cliché. But this vindictive attack on my company is completely disproportionate. My company, Henry, 80% mine, according to the incorporation documents you signed." He exhaled sharply. "Fine, our company. But these allegations about misappropriated funds and corporate espionage, you're destroying everything we've built over a personal grievance." "Not destroying. I corrected. Reclaiming. There's a difference. The board has suspended me, he exploded, his composure finally cracking. 25 years building this business, and you've turned them against me in a day. You turned them against yourself when you started siphoning company assets and planning to poach clients for your new venture with Elizabeth. A long silence followed. When Henry spoke again, his voice had a dangerous edge. You'll regret this, Jane. When the dust settles and you're alone with nothing but money you don't know how to manage, you'll realize what you've thrown away. I gazed out at the glittering skyline, feeling strangely calm in the face of his threats. Actually, Henry, I'm starting to realize what I've gained. I ended the call and silenced my phone again. Then I poured myself a glass of champagne, an expensive bottle I'd purchased to mark this moment, and stepped back onto the terrace. Below me, Manhattan pulsed with energy, with possibility. Somewhere in that sprawling landscape were offices, where I might soon establish my women's investment cooperative. There were restaurants where I would dine with Elena and other new professional connections. There were museums and theaters I would visit on my own schedule, according to my own interests. For the first time in 25 years, my future was entirely my own to shape, and it tasted like freedom. My first week of independence unfurled with a methodical precision that would have impressed even Henry. Each day, I built another layer of protection around my new life, securing my position before the inevitable confrontation that would come. When he returned from Singapore, on Wednesday, I met with the board of directors of Westmore Consulting, not as Henry's wife, but as the majority shareholder. The 7 men and 2 women who governed the company's operations had known me for years, but only as a gracious hostess at corporate events. The elegant woman who remembered their children's names and dietary preferences. Their surprise at seeing me enter the conference room in a business suit, flanked by Mary and Francis, quickly gave way to wary respect as I presented the evidence of Henry's financial mismanagement and planned corporate sabotage. Mrs. Westmore, began Richard Harmon, the board chairman, while we don't dispute your legal ownership position, running a global consulting firm requires specific expertise and industry relationships that I've been developing for 25 years, I finished for him. I wrote the original business plan for this company. I developed the client management system we still use. I've edited every major proposal, including the Richardson expansion strategy currently being implemented in Singapore. I slid folders across the table to each board member. Inside, you'll find testimonials from our longest-standing clients detailing my contributions to their accounts. You'll also find a preliminary business plan for transitioning leadership. Diane Porter, one of the 2 female board members, opened her folder and began scanning the contents. You're not proposing to take over as CEO? No, I confirmed. I'm proposing we promote Luke Spencer from the London office to interim CEO while conducting a proper executive search. I would remain as a non-executive chairperson, focusing on strategic direction rather than day-to-day operations. I could see the relief on their faces. They had feared an inexperienced housewife demanding to run the company out of spite. Instead, I was presenting a reasonable transition plan that would maintain stability while addressing Henry's betrayal. By the end of the 3-hour meeting, the board had unanimously approved my proposal. Henry would remain suspended pending investigation, Luke would be appointed interim CEO effective immediately, and I would assume the role of board chairperson once the divorce was finalized. On Thursday, I met with Michael. I had arranged for him to fly in from Boston, telling him only that I needed to discuss an important family matter. We met at a quiet restaurant near my new apartment, his face betraying his concern as soon as he saw me. Mom, what's going on? Dad's not answering his phone? And you're living in Manhattan? Are you sick? I reached across the table and took his hand. I'm not sick, sweetheart. I'm getting divorced. His expression cycled through shock, confusion, and finally a dawning comprehension. This is about Elizabeth, isn't it? I saw them together at a restaurant last time I was home. I wanted to believe it was just a business dinner, but... You knew? I asked, surprised. He looked down, ashamed. I suspected. Dad was being too obvious. I should have said something to you. No, I assured him. This isn't your burden to carry. And the situation is more complicated than just the affair. Your father has been misappropriating company funds and planning to start a competing business with Elizabeth. I explained everything, my ownership stake, the board's decision, the frozen assets. Michael listened intently, his medical training evident in his calm, analytical questions. What can I do? He asked when I finished. Just be Michael, I said, squeezing his hand. Don't feel you have to take sides. He's still your father, and I would never ask you to cut him out of your life. But he betrayed you, Michael protested. After everything you've done for him, for us. And that's between him and me? I interrupted gently. Your relationship with him is separate. All I ask is that you understand why I had to take these steps. He nodded slowly. I do understand, and I'm proud of you, Mom. You deserve better than what he's given you. On Friday, I focused on financial security. With Francis's guidance, I established a comprehensive investment strategy for my assets once the divorce was settled. We created a diversified portfolio that would generate steady income while preserving capital, a conservative approach that would give me time to develop my investment cooperative concept without financial pressure. I also consulted with a cybersecurity expert who swept my new apartment and devices for surveillance, changed all my passwords and security questions, and established encrypted communication channels with Mary and Francis. Henry was technically sophisticated, and I wasn't taking any chances with my digital privacy. By the weekend, I had completed my immediate security checklist. My new home was established, my legal position was secure, my son was supportive, and my financial future was protected. I had created a fortress of independence that Henry couldn't breach, no matter how furious he might be upon his return. The woman who had once organized her entire existence around her husband's needs had systematically organized her liberation from him. And she had done it with a thoroughness that would have made any strategic consultant proud. Henry's flight from Singapore landed at JFK on Monday morning, a week after his departure. I knew this because Luke, now installed as interim CEO, had informed me that Henry had been recalled by the board to address the allegations against him. Elizabeth, tellingly, remained in Singapore, apparently abandoning their romantic getaway once it became clear that Henry's professional future was in jeopardy. Mary had arranged for the first face-to-face meeting between our respective legal teams to take place that afternoon at her office. Henry's attorney, James Barrett, was a corporate shark I'd met at countless firm events. A man who'd once patted my shoulder condescendingly while explaining to me why prenuptial agreements were so important, apparently forgetting that Henry and I had married before either of us had acquired significant assets. Are you ready for this? Mary asked as we waited in her sleek conference room, a pot of coffee and precisely arranged water glasses the only concession to hospitality. More than ready, I replied, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle from my navy suit. I'd chosen my outfit. Carefully, professional but not flashy, confident but not aggressive. The Jane who would face Henry today was neither the submissive wife he'd taken for granted, nor an avenging fury. She was simply a woman claiming what was rightfully hers. At precisely 2 p.m., Henry strode through the door, James Barrett at his heels. The week in Singapore had not been kind to him. His normally immaculate appearance was compromised by the shadows. Beneath his eyes and the slight dishevelment of his suit, signs of the overseas flight, certainly, but also of a man whose carefully ordered world had imploded. His eyes locked with mine, searching for clues, for weaknesses, for the Jane he knew, how to manipulate. What he found instead was steady resolve. "Let's begin," Mary said crisply, indicating the chairs opposite us. Henry sat stiffly, his lawyer arranging documents beside him with practiced efficiency. My client wishes to resolve this unfortunate situation quickly and discreetly, Barrett began, his tone suggesting he was granting us a favor. We're prepared to offer a generous settlement that would provide Mrs. Westmore with financial security while allowing Westmore Consulting to continue operations under Mr. Westmore's leadership. Mary smiled with the patience of a teacher addressing a particularly slow student. That's a non-starter, as I believe I communicated to your office last week. Mrs. Westmore owns 80% of Westmore Consulting. That's not negotiable. A technicality, Barrett dismissed with a wave of his hand. A corporate formality from 25 years ago that hardly reflects the reality of who built the company. The law doesn't consider ownership a technicality, Mary countered. And as for who built the company, we have substantial evidence of Mrs. Westmore's integral role in its development and success. Barrett turned to me directly, ignoring proper protocol. Jane, be reasonable. You've been a housewife for decades. You have no experience running a business of this magnitude. You're going to destroy everything out of spite. Before Mary could object to this inappropriate direct address, I responded calmly. I'm not planning to run the company, Mr. Barrett. The board has appointed Luke Spencer as interim CEO while a proper executive search is conducted. I'll serve as non-executive chairperson, focusing on strategic direction, an area in which I have 25 years of experience. I watched Henry's face as I spoke, noting the flicker of surprise. He had expected me to make emotional demands, to overreach, out of vindictiveness or ignorance. The measured, strategic approach caught him off guard. That's absurd, he finally said, the first words he'd spoken since entering the room. The board can't make those decisions without my approval. They can when you've been suspended for financial impropriety and corporate espionage, Mary interjected. Your plans to establish a competing firm with Ms. Chen, using proprietary information and client relationships from Westmore, constitute serious breaches of fiduciary duty. Henry's face flushed with anger. Those allegations are completely unfounded. Elizabeth is a valued employee who shares your suite at the Marina Bay Sands and was scheduled to accompany you on a romantic weekend in Bali. I finished for him. We have the itinerary, Henry, and the emails discussing your plans for a new venture once you were free of entanglements. A heavy silence fell over the room. Barrett leaned over to whisper something in Henry's ear, likely advising him to remain silent. Henry ignored him. You went through my private emails? He demanded, indignation overriding caution. No, I replied. The board authorized a review of corporate communications when financial irregularities were discovered. Your private account was included because you used it for company business. Specifically, business you wanted to hide. Henry's composure cracked further. This is insane. You're twisting everything. 25 years of marriage and you ambush me the moment I'm out of the country? I met his gaze steadily. 25 years of marriage, and you were planning to leave me with nothing while you started a new life with your 25-year-old assistant. The only difference is that I found out and acted first. Barrett cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the meeting. Perhaps we should focus on practical matters. My client is willing to negotiate a fair division of assets that... Your client has been transferring company assets into hidden accounts for months, Mary interrupted. The courts have already frozen those funds pending investigation. We're not here to negotiate. We're here to inform Mr. Westmore of the reality of his situation. She slid a document across the table. This is our proposed settlement. Mrs. Westmore retains her 80% ownership of Westmore Consulting and all associated entities. Mr. Westmore retains his 20% ownership but relinquishes any operational role. The personal assets are divided according to standard equitable distribution. It's generous, considering the circumstances. Henry didn't touch the document. Instead, he looked directly at me, his expression shifting from anger to something more calculated. Jane, he said, his voice softening to the persuasive tone he used with difficult clients. We need to discuss this privately. This has gone too far. Too fast. We can work this out between us, as we always have. I almost smiled at the familiar manipulation, the appeal to our shared history, the implication that outside advisors were creating unnecessary conflict. How many times had that approach worked before? "There's nothing to discuss privately, Henry," I replied. "Everything that needs to be said is being said here, with our attorneys present." For the first time, genuine fear flickered across his face. The realization that his usual tactics had lost their power, that the woman sitting across from him was no longer susceptible to his influence. He was facing a stranger who knew all his secrets. The 2 weeks following our initial legal meeting passed in a blur of depositions, financial reviews, and strategic planning. Henry, realizing that his usual manipulative tactics had failed, shifted to aggressive legal maneuvering, filing motions to contest my ownership percentage, challenging the board's authority to suspend him, and demanding immediate restoration of his access to company funds. Each attempt was systematically dismantled by Mary and her team. The ownership documents were irrefutable. The board's actions were within their authority given the evidence of financial impropriety. The court maintained the freeze on the hidden accounts pending full investigation. Henry's frustration mounted. With each defeat, his arrogance giving way to desperation as he watched his carefully constructed life crumble around him. Elizabeth had resigned from Westmore Consulting and disappeared from New York entirely, her dreams of becoming a corporate power couple with Henry evaporating in the face of his fall from grace. On a crisp November morning, 3 weeks after Henry's return from Singapore, I stood in the lobby of Westmore Consulting's Manhattan headquarters for the first time as its chairperson. The security guard who had watched me sign in as Henry Westmore's wife for 20 years now nodded respectfully as I presented my own access credentials. "Good morning, Mrs. Westmore," he said, handing me a visitor badge that read, "Jane Westmore, Board Chair." "Good morning, Paul," I replied, remembering his name as I always had, a small courtesy that Henry had never bothered with. "How's your daughter doing at college?" His face brightened. "She's thriving at Cornell, ma'am. Thank you for asking." The executive floor had changed little since my last visit, but my presence there had transformed completely. No longer was I delivering a forgotten file or joining Henry for a company function. Today, I was attending my first board meeting as chairperson, a position formalized yesterday when the court had rejected Henry's latest attempt to block my involvement in the company. Luke Spencer, the interim CEO, met me at the elevator. In his mid-40s with a British accent and impeccable credentials, Luke had been one of my recommendations to Henry years ago, a talented manager whose potential I'd spotted during a London client dinner. "The board is assembled," he informed me as we walked toward the conference room. Henry insisted on attending. "As a 20% shareholder, that's his right," I replied calmly. Luke hesitated. "He's been calling board members individually, trying to build opposition to your appointment, suggesting this is a simple marital dispute that's damaging the company." I nodded, unsurprised. And their responses? Mixed. Some are uncomfortable with the situation, but the evidence of his financial maneuvers is too clear to ignore, and your leadership plan has reassured those concerned about stability. As we approached the boardroom, I could feel my heart rate accelerate slightly. This moment represented the culmination of my transformation, the final step from Henry's shadow into the light of my own authority. I paused, took a deep breath, and then nodded to Luke. He opened the door, and we entered together. 9 faces turned toward us, 7 men, 2 women, and Henry at the far end of the table. He had positioned himself in the chairman's seat, a deliberate power play that I noted without comment. "Good morning," I said, taking the empty seat nearest the door, neutral territory that avoided a direct challenge to Henry's positioning, while making it clear I wouldn't be relegated to the sidelines. Richard Harmon, the board's senior member, cleared his throat. "Now that we're all present, let's call this special meeting to order." He glanced at Henry. "As discussed before your arrival, Henry, this meeting will address the leadership transition and strategic direction under the new structure." Henry's jaw tightened. "I want it noted in the minutes that I object to this entire proceeding. This company is being hijacked as part of a personal vendetta." "Your objection is noted," Richard replied evenly. "Now, let's proceed with the agenda. Luke will present the transition plan, followed by Mrs. Westmore's strategic overview. As Luke began his presentation, a detailed outline of operational adjustments and client communications, I observed the board members' reactions. Most were engaged and attentive, asking thoughtful questions about specific accounts and processes. Two seemed uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact with both Henry and me. Only one, Thomas Wells, Henry's longtime golf partner, showed open skepticism bordering on hostility. When my turn came, I opened the leather portfolio I'd brought with me, the same one that had stored my abandoned dreams, now repurposed to contain my vision for Westmore Consulting's future. "The company stands at a critical inflection point," I began, my voice steady and confident. "Our core consulting services remain strong, but we've underinvested in emerging markets and digital transformation. The strategic plan before you addresses these gaps while leveraging our established reputation for personalized client service." For the next 20 minutes, I outlined a comprehensive growth strategy that built on Westmore's strengths while addressing its vulnerabilities. A plan I'd been formulating in my mind for years as I observed the business from my unique vantage point. As I spoke, I watched the board members' expressions shift from polite attention to genuine interest. Even Thomas Wells leaned forward when I detailed a new approach to the Asian markets he oversaw. Henry's face, meanwhile, cycled through disbelief, anger, and finally a grudging recognition. Many of the initiatives I proposed had been ideas I'd suggested to him over the years. Concepts he had dismissed or claimed were impractical, now presented with supporting research and implementation frameworks. When I finished, Richard Harmon was the first to speak. "This is remarkably comprehensive, Mrs. Westmore. You've clearly given this considerable thought." "For about 25 years," I replied with a small smile. The discussion that followed was vigorous and engaged, with board members building on various elements of my proposal. Henry remained silent, his isolation growing more apparent with each enthusiastic response to my ideas. Finally, Richard called for the vote on my formal appointment as board chairperson. The result was 8 in favor, with only Thomas Wells abstaining. Henry, lacking a vote due to his suspended status, simply watched as his former kingdom officially changed hands. As the meeting concluded, Henry remained seated while others gathered their materials. When the room had emptied except for us, he finally spoke. "Congratulations," he said, the word sharp with bitterness. "You've won." I regarded him steadily. "This was never a competition, Henry. At least it didn't have to be." "What do you want me to say?" he demanded. "That I'm sorry? That I made a mistake with Elizabeth? Fine, I admit it. But this—" He gestured at the boardroom. "This nuclear option is completely disproportionate." "The disproportionate response was yours," I corrected him. "Planning to discard me personally and professionally after 25 years of partnership. I'm simply claiming what I helped build." For once, Henry had no ready reply. The divorce proceedings concluded with unexpected swiftness. Henry, his leverage evaporating as each legal challenge failed, finally accepted the settlement Mary had proposed in our first meeting. The company ownership remained 80-20, with Henry retaining his shareholder status but relinquishing any operational role. Our personal assets were divided equitably, though Henry's attempts to hide funds meant the division heavily favored me. 6 weeks after that first confrontation in Mary's office, we met at the courthouse to finalize the divorce. The conference room was sterile and impersonal, a fitting backdrop for the formal dissolution of 25 years of marriage. Henry arrived with Barrett, both men subdued compared to their earlier combative stance. I sat with Mary, a sense of calm certainty settling over me as the court commissioner reviewed our settlement agreement. "Both parties have reviewed and signed the final decree?" the commissioner asked, glancing between our respective attorneys. "Yes, Your Honor," Mary confirmed. "Yes," Barrett echoed. "Very well. The court finds the settlement equitable and grants the dissolution of marriage effective immediately." With those simple words and the tap of her gavel, my marriage officially ended. No drama, no tears, just the quiet closing of a chapter that had consumed most of my adult life. As we gathered our belongings, Henry approached me directly for the first time since the board meeting. "So that's it," he said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. 25 years undone in 6 weeks? "The marriage is over," I agreed. "But the years happened, Henry. They shaped us both." He studied my face as if seeing something new there. "You seem different." "I am different. Or rather, I'm myself again, the woman you met 25 years ago who had her own ambitions and ideas. She just got buried for a while." An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. I could see him struggling to reconcile the compliant wife he'd known with the assured woman standing before him now. "Michael wants us to have dinner together next week when he's in town," Henry finally said. "For his sake. Can we manage that?" I considered the request. The vindictive response would be refusal, but such pettiness didn't interest me anymore. "For Michael, yes. I'll have my assistant coordinate with yours." He winced slightly at the formality, but nodded. "Thank you." As we prepared to leave, Henry hesitated, then asked the question that I sensed had been troubling him throughout our legal battle. "Were you planning this all along? Waiting for the right moment to take control of the company?" I shook my head. "No, Henry, I was planning to be your wife for the rest of my life. You were the one planning an exit strategy. But the incorporation documents were a precaution you suggested because of potential liability from your former employer. I never thought about the implications until I discovered your affair." His shoulders sagged slightly. "So I handed you the weapon you used against me." "You gave me legal protection I didn't know I needed," I corrected him. "There's a difference." With nothing left to say, we parted ways at the courthouse steps, Henry toward the waiting car that would take him to his new bachelor apartment, and I toward the independent life I was still discovering day by day. The marriage was over, but the story of Jane Westmore was just beginning. 3 months after the divorce, I stood at the podium in a sleek conference room at the International Women's Finance Initiative, addressing a gathering of female entrepreneurs and investors. Elena sat in the front row, beaming with the proud satisfaction of a mentor whose protege had exceeded expectations. "Traditional investment models have systematically undervalued women-led businesses," I explained, advancing to the next slide in my presentation. "The data shows that companies with female founders receive less than 3% of venture capital, yet they consistently deliver higher returns on investment." The room was filled with nodding heads and furious note-taking. These women, accomplished professionals from across the financial spectrum, were engaging with my concept for the Women's Innovation Fund with an enthusiasm that validated years of relegated ideas and dismissed suggestions. "What we're proposing is not charity or social justice, though those are worthy causes," I continued. "This is about identifying undervalued market opportunities. It's about recognizing that gender bias in investment creates inefficiencies we can exploit for financial gain." When the presentation concluded, I was surrounded by women eager to participate, as investors, advisors, or entrepreneurs seeking funding. Business cards were pressed into my hands, connections made, partnerships proposed. The investment cooperative I'd outlined a decade ago, the one Henry had dismissed as adorable, was coming to life with remarkable momentum. Later, over dinner with Elena, I marveled at the day's success. "I never imagined such an immediate response," I admitted, sipping my wine. I thought building credibility would take years. Elena smiled knowingly. Your track record speaks for itself, Jane. 25 years building a global consulting firm, even if your name wasn't on the door until now. Still, the speed of it all. I shook my head in wonder. 3 institutional investors have already committed seed funding. Margaret Wilson wants to partner on Asian market expansion. The governor's office called about joining their Economic Development Council. That's not luck or charity, Elena said firmly. It's recognition of your capabilities. Capabilities you've always had but were channeled into supporting Henry's ambitions rather than your own. My phone chimed with an incoming message. Michael, sending a photo of his acceptance letter to a prestigious surgical residency program in Chicago. Couldn't have done it without you, Mom, his text read. You taught me to never settle. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I'd encouraged my son to pursue excellence, to claim his place in the world unapologetically, while accepting far less for myself. Now, as his life was taking flight, mine was experiencing an unexpected renaissance. Back in my Tribeca apartment that evening, I stood on the terrace watching the city lights shimmer against the night sky. My calendar for the coming weeks was filled with meetings, speaking engagements, and strategy sessions for both Westmore Consulting and the Women's Innovation Fund. At 48, an age when many believed women became invisible, I had never been more visible or influential. The talents I'd applied in Henry's shadow now flourished in the light. Most surprising was the visceral joy I felt each day. The creative satisfaction of building something meaningful, the intellectual stimulation of engaging with challenging concepts, the simple pleasure of making decisions without calculating their impact on someone else's ego. This unexpected blooming in midlife wasn't just about success or vindication. It was about discovering that beneath the accommodating wife and supportive partner I'd been for 25 years, the bright, ambitious woman Henry had first been attracted to had never really disappeared. She had been waiting patiently for her moment to emerge. The seasons changed, and with them, my life continued to evolve. The Women's Innovation Fund grew from concept to reality. Westmore Consulting flourished under new leadership, and I settled into the rhythm of a life directed by my own choices. Each day brought new challenges and opportunities: a speech at Taos, an economic forum, strategy sessions with promising female entrepreneurs, quiet dinners with Michael when his medical training allowed. Time, which had once seemed to crawl during my years with Henry, now moved with astonishing speed. Days became months, months became years, and gradually, my story spread. Through business publications, women's networks, and eventually a profile in Forbes that dubbed me the silent partner who found her voice. Now, 5 years since that pivotal day when I discovered I owned 80% of what Henry had always called his assets, I find myself reflecting on the journey that brought me here. My inbox regularly fills with messages from women in similar situations, asking how they too can reclaim their power, their dreams, their sense of self. Here's what I want you to know. Your contributions matter, even when they're invisible to others. I spent decades editing documents no one knew I touched, strategizing for a company that never carried my name, building something substantial while being treated as incidental. Document your work. Keep records. Your effort has value, whether others acknowledge it or not. Trust that quiet voice inside you, the one that whispers, "This isn't right," when others are telling you to be grateful, to be reasonable, to be less. That voice is your true self, and she deserves to be heard. I silenced mine for 25 years, believing that compromise meant surrendering my dreams for someone else's. True partnership lifts both people. It doesn't diminish one to elevate the other. It's never too late to begin again. At 48, I thought my professional prime had passed, that my options had narrowed to supporting roles and careful accommodations. I was wrong. The Women's Innovation Fund now manages over $300 million in assets focused on female entrepreneurs. Westmore Consulting has expanded into 12 countries under leadership that recognizes diverse voices. My second act has proven more fulfilling than I could have imagined. The most valuable asset in any relationship is respect. Not love, not loyalty, not shared history, respect. When Henry stopped seeing me as an equal partner worthy of honesty and recognition, the foundation of our marriage crumbled. No amount of financial security or social status can compensate for being diminished by the person who should be your greatest advocate. Your worth isn't defined by your relationship status. Society tells women that being chosen by a man, particularly a successful one, is the ultimate achievement. That divorced women have failed, regardless of circumstances. That being alone is a tragedy rather than an opportunity. I've learned that true fulfillment comes from living authentically, from building a life that reflects your values and ambitions, whether or not that includes a partner. Last month, I received an unexpected email from Elizabeth, Henry's former assistant. She's now finishing her MBA and wanted advice on launching her own consulting practice. We met for coffee, two women at different life stages bound by a shared experience. "I've been following your work with the fund," she told me. "You're who?" "I want to be in 20 years. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Remember, the power to rewrite your story has been within you all along. Sometimes it just takes a shocking revelation to make you finally pick up the pen. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.